You want to start sewing, but you just don't know where to begin. And everything online feels a little bit either too advanced and complicated or just completely outdated. So hello, my name is Jack and I've been designing clothes for around 8 years now. Essentially in this video, I'm not trying to sell you anything. I just want to give you guidance and some value so you're able to make clothes yourself. I've been running a clothing brand called Rough Cut Official and I post all my one-of-one creations online on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and I've been doing that for around 8 years. So I think I have enough knowledge to be able to showcase with you guys. By the end of this video, you'll be set up with a sewing machine and you'll be able to make your own piece of clothing. This video is not about becoming the world's best designer. It is about building the confidence and being able to actually make the clothing that you want to wear. And I'm not going to make this overcomplicated in any way. We're going to take this step by step. I'm going to show you what machines you should buy, what tools you actually need to be able to make clothing, and by the end you will have your first wearable piece of clothing. This video is for a few different types of people. The first person being, maybe you have just got a sewing machine laying around collecting dust and you've wanted to pull it out but you just don't quite know where to start. Maybe you're the type of person who's tried sewing once or twice but you've just got too frustrated with doing it and just put it away. Or maybe you've just been watching people make cool stuff online forever and it's finally now your time to say, let me give that a go. And wherever you're at, whether you want to come out the back end of this video, learn the skills and go make a full jacket, or you just want to get to the end of this video, make a balaclava and be able to call it a day with that accomplishment, this video is for you. All right, and before we talk about machines and fabric, let's talk about your space. So obviously I do have it, but you do not need a studio. You do not need a workbench. When I first started sewing, I literally was in a shed, which is like 1/20th of the space I'm currently in. I was pinning stuff on the floor. I just had enough space for my sewing machine, but you just make it work. You're going to be sewing for hours, so make sure you have a good chair. I could probably still get a better one, but make sure you have a good chair because you're going to be sat on this for hours. And even just cutting on the floor, as long as you've got enough space to do stuff, then make sure it's just not cluttered and you know where things are, because when you start losing tools, that is the worst part of the process of sewing. Regardless of what your space is, regardless of how big it is or how small it is, just make it work. Don't worry about making it aesthetic. You'll improve all that as you go. Okay, so the next thing we're going to get onto is the sewing machine itself. I'm going to show you a few different machines that you can buy. I'm going to share my screen. Maybe you are looking to buy your first sewing machine, or maybe you've got a sewing machine and you just don't know how good, or even if it is good enough to make a piece of clothing on. You don't need a million different stitch types. You just need a machine that stitches a straight stitch and doesn't stress you out. I'm going to show you some examples of some sewing machines that I've used in the past, some ones that I know are good, some more sort of experienced machines, the ones that I currently use, and just basically give you a little in-depth into what sewing machines are the best to buy, how much they are, what you can get away with using, what's the one to sort of aim for buying. Let's jump right into it. So first off, we have, of course, the Singer Heavy Duty. If you've gone on Instagram or you've seen any sort of creator, then they probably use this machine. This machine is all-rounded amazing. It does have all these different stitch types with it. It's easy, it's super beginner friendly. I'm pretty sure this is what Singer made this machine for. The next machine that we're going to talk about is the Neki Q132A, and that machine is the one that I personally use when I'm on the go. So I know that this machine is good because I've literally built jackets out in Italy and I've made jackets in America sewing out on the streets with this machine. I think I picked mine up for around £220. Okay, so this is the next machine I'm going to talk about. This is the Juki DDL-8700 lock stitch machine. This is the flatbed machine. This is a more advanced sewing machine essentially. It is the exact machine that I've got just behind me over there. It's the machine that I have used for 5 years straight. And this is a more of an advanced sort of machine, specifically for people that are sewing less as a hobby and more as something they're trying to make into sort of like a job or make money out of the things they're doing. It's not needed, but I find it's a lot easier to have something that's stuck to the table when you're throwing stitches round, and when you're doing them fast seams and sort of creating clothing to a higher capacity. It might be good to upgrade to something like this. Again, it's not needed, but this is the one that I use. You can pick these up for around £550 on the internet. The next thing I'm going to talk about is the Gumtree, or if you're in the US, the kind of Craigslist sewing machines, the second-hand sewing machines that you can find super cheap. If you are just jumping into sewing and this is something you just want to dive straight into, get going, I wouldn't recommend even spending the £250 on the Singer. I wouldn't recommend spending the £500 on the Juki. When I first started sewing, I was literally just using £20 sewing machines from the charity shop that I would find. I'd go to the thrift shop and pick one up for like £30. It would break, I would buy another one. At the end of the day, as I always mention, these things are just tools, so you don't have to buy the most expensive ones as long as they work and do the job. If you are buying one on a budget, then you can go on an app like Gumtree in the UK or go on Craigslist, and you'll be able to find machines like this. This is £89, and there is things to look at. This is only like a few miles away from me, so if I was first starting, this might be one I look at. But you want to make sure that it's stitching. So with sewing machines, they always have this sort of, test fabric that they're testing, so make sure to look out for that. And yeah, just like read the description, read the title. This is £89, and this will probably last you quite a long time. I guess the other thing, here, look, you got a Genome. Genome's quite a good brand. You're looking for the Singers, the Genomes, the Jukis, all of the known sort of sewing brands. But this looks like a decent start, £125 easy. And then the last thing, I guess, auction sites like eBay. These are refurbished. Look, there's a refurbished sewing machine for £79 here. It's got the test fabric, so you know it's working, and this will just do the job. Like, I can't express enough how these are just tools, and you don't necessarily need the best ones. It's good to buy the most reliable machines, but it's not needed. You can start with anything. I started, as I mentioned, by swapping loads of different machines around whenever they break. You just got to go for it. It's not about the machine, but I guess hopefully that gave you a little bit of insight into what ones are available. The next part of the process is actually threading your machine, turning it on and loading a needle, getting your first stitches done. And I truly believe that this stage, this part of the process, is what most people just turn around and walk away on. I think people think it's way more complicated than it actually is. It's not complex at all. You literally just thread your needle and get stitching. I'm going to show you how to do this. You can refer back to this video, watch this video a million times, and you're literally able to figure out how to thread your machine every time. Do it 4 times and you'll do it a million times. I've threaded my machines thousands of times now, and it is just muscle memory. I'm not going to show you on the current machine that I showed you I had, the domestic one, because it will look too confusing. So tomorrow I'm going to get a Singer heavy duty. I'm going to put it on this table and we're going to talk about how to thread the machine. So before we get into actually threading this machine right here, the Singer Heavy Duty, I'm going to show you all the tools that you need to be able to make a piece of clothing. I think, again, there is a misconception, people thinking that you need so many different tools before you even start sewing. That is not true. I'm going to show you what you need, and I'm going to show you ways that you can work around that. So you're going to need a pair of scissors, and this pair of scissors is your fabric scissors. They're not your kitchen scissors, and pretty much the only things these are going to cut are fabric. If you use them to cut up stuff like the paper in your patterns, then they're going to blunt them very easily. You need a pair of snips. These are incredibly handy for snipping thread, but keep them only for snipping thread because otherwise you'll ruin them. You're going to need pins and clips. I have this pin cushion that wraps round my sewing machine, and then I just keep my pins there. It's easier whilst you're sewing. You rip it through and then take a pin out your fabric, put it in the pin cushion. Easy. So you can use a seam ripper, but I like to use a blade. This blade just cuts through all the thread that I've accidentally stitched, or maybe you've made a mistake. You just run a blade right through the seam and then it takes all the thread out. So you can either use tailor's chalk, or I use wax. Wax is better in my opinion because you run it along the fabric, you hit it with an iron, and then it comes straight off, whereas chalk is a pain in the ass to get off the fabric. Perfectly brings me into an iron. You need an iron, preferably a steam iron. I have this pretty techie one that has a tank which you fill up loads of water, but you can use your home iron, it works the exact same. And then there is loads of optional stuff that will make your workflow a lot more easier. One of them things could be like a ruler or a pen. I'm sure you have all of these things laying around the house. If you don't, you can use something straight for a ruler. There's many ways around all these different things. It's just about figuring it out as you go along. But one helpful thing that I'm going to use today is this industrial spool holder for a domestic machine. So obviously this is an industrial spool. You might have a smaller one that looks something like this, and if you have a smaller spool, you don't need this. But basically what this does is you put the spool on there and then it just holds your thread. Otherwise you can't fit this big old spool on your domestic machine. When I first started, I never had half of this stuff. You don't need any of it. You can use them kitchen scissors if that is all you have. You don't need a pair of snips. You can use the same scissors to cut the thread as you use to cut your fabric. I wouldn't recommend all this, but like things like this spool holder you don't need. Like the pin cushion you don't really need, as long as you're not going to lose them. Just get like a little tub. All of this is stuff that I never had, and now I have little things like this electric fabric cutter, but back in the day I never had this. This just now speeds up my process. It's about making something work. It is not about the gear. You can get an amazing end result without half of the gear. Right, so we're going to move on to actually threading this machine, setting it up and getting our first stitches ready. I think that this is the like entry level barrier that people just stop on, and they put that sewing machine back in the cupboard and they never touch it again because it seems complicated to actually get it to work. There is two parts to this mechanism, and understanding how a sewing machine works is going to help you through that process. This right here is a Singer heavy duty, like I've mentioned earlier, and this is incredibly easy to thread. As I mentioned, there's two parts. There's the bobbin, and then there is the main top piece and the needle that you have to thread. So the main top piece and the needle are one thing, and then the bobbin is another. Essentially, how a sewing machine works is the needle goes in with the thread, it will pick up the bottom bobbin thread, and then that will simultaneously work together to be able to cause a stitch in your fabric. Because if you just thread this top part of the machine and then start sewing, you're not going to see any results. You need that bottom bobbin, which is under the sewing foot, to be threaded the right way. So I'm assuming you're a pure beginner. I'm going to show you step by step how to set this machine up, and we're going to get our first stitches. Let's go. So just to make this clear, the things that you're going to need for this is you're actually going to need your power lead for your sewing machine, obviously. You're going to need your sewing machine itself. You're going to need a piece of scrap fabric to be able to test your stitches. You're going to need a bit of thread, whether that's domestic spool or industrial, and you're going to need some snippers. And that's everything you're going to need for this process. So this part here is where we're going to start. Essentially, this is your bobbin casing, and inside you have your bobbin. So to be able to open this on your machine might be a little bit different. If your machine is different, you should be able to pull this out and then actually unclip the bobbin from the side. This will be a vertical bobbin. In my case, I have a horizontal bobbin, and on a lot of the newer machines, you're going to see a horizontal bobbin. To open this casing, you're just pulling this black thing. It will lift this up. You can put this to the side, keep this safe, and then you can just pull your bobbin out of the casing. And that is your bobbin right there. So the next piece we're going to focus on is this piece right here. Essentially, this is where you're going to fill up your bobbin with thread. To be able to fill your bobbin up, you should be able to put it right on top of this metal piece here, and then you should clip it in, just like that. It clips in just like that. So I'm presuming in this video that you're using a domestic machine, and all of these steps that I'm about to show you, they might be slightly different, but they're all pretty much the same. The reason you're filling this bobbin up is so your top thread that goes through the needle is able to go through your fabric, pick up that stitch and pull it back through. And to be able to fill up this bobbin right here with thread, what you're going to do, you're basically going to grab your bobbin, and you can see on the bobbin there is these holes, and in these holes you essentially just want to thread your thread right through one of these holes, just like that. And now you want to just place it right on top. You want to click it into place. This just takes a simple click. So assuming that you've plugged your machine into the power and you've turned it on and your machine now has power, you essentially want to hold the top bit of the thread, you want to hold the bottom bit of the thread, assuming that you've clicked it into place, and you want to basically press your foot down on the foot pedal of your machine and it will slowly do the bobbin. And then you can hold this and you can hold your thread. Essentially you want to fill this up until it's completely full, and then I'll show you what to do. The machine will automatically stop threading the bobbin once it has gotten to the end of how much fabric can fit on the bobbin. So as you can see, when I place my foot down on the sewing foot, nothing happens. So you can click that out of place, you can snip this bit of fabric off, and you now have a full bobbin. Before you replace this bobbin thread into your machine, you need to cut off the excess starting thread. This is just the thread that you were holding that threaded through the hole. You can just snip that off like that, and now you have a clean bobbin. So this is the part you need to pay attention to. If you pay attention to this right here, it will give you an indication of how you need to thread your bobbin into the machine. But I'm going to show you. And essentially what you want to do is you want to place your bobbin into the machine just like that. Just like that. You want to hold your bobbin still. And there should be a little groove that your thread just threads right under there. And then you just want to put your plate back on. We'll get to this in a second. So now you've just placed the bobbin into the bobbin casing, you've put the lid back on. What that little groove does is it acts as your tension to your bottom bobbin thread. We're going to thread the top of the machine now, and then we're going to come back to the bobbin a little bit later once we've finished threading the needle, and then I'll show you what to do. So essentially we're looking at a top-down view of the sewing machine. You've got some numbers here. Number 1, number 2, number 3 is on the side of the machine, number 4 is on the side of the machine, number 5 is there, and then you just thread your needle after. But essentially this is the direction of where your thread is going to come from, whether you have the domestic thread that goes on this, or in my case down in this corner I have the industrial thread on the spool holder. This is going to run into number 1, and then it's going to run to number 2. It's going to go down around this little thing here, up around the hook, and then back down to the needle. I'm going to show you this in depth, but I just wanted to show you a few other things on the top of the machine first. So you've got your tension here. I would say always keep it on 4 to be safe. If you're doing stretchier fabric, you're going to need to look at what number that's going to be. Next to it, you've got your needle position. If you're doing like a zip or something like that, you might want to change the needle position to the left or to the right. But for now, keep that in the center. Here you have the width. This is the width of your zigzag stitches, as you can see. And then as I showed you just a minute ago, this is how to fill up the bobbin. Everything else is pretty unnecessary. This is for filling up your bobbin, but we've done it a different way. That is the top of the machine. And this is your front of your machine. You can now see the 3 and 4 markers and the 6 marker. This is all the direction of how to thread the machine. Here you've got back and forth stitch, so when you press that down, your stitching will start to go backwards. You've got the length of your stitch here. I normally keep this around 3, but if you're trying to do fast stitches, you want to turn it to 4. If you're doing number 1, you're going to stitch really slow on your machine. These stitches are quite close together, and then number 4 is obviously quite wider apart. And then down here on the bottom right, you have all the different stitch types. Mainly for this video, we're just going to keep it on the main one, which is this dotted lock stitch. But you've got zigzag, you've got all of these decorative stitches, and then these 3 here, this is your buttonholes. So your machine should have come with a plastic thing that looks like this. You can attach that to your machine and then do buttonholes with a domestic machine. The pros of a domestic machine is that it can do buttonholes, and if you're making things like trousers, overshirts, anything that would need a buttonhole, it is amazing for that. I've seen people online, and I tend to do it myself. I've got my industrial machine over here, but that can't do buttonholes. So if you end up upgrading one day to an industrial machine and your domestic machine is kind of collecting dust because you don't need it anymore, then you could just set it up as a buttonhole maker. You stitch everything together on your industrial, you use your domestic for your buttonhole maker. We're not going to focus on that today. We're just going to focus on the lock stitch. So now you're kind of understanding how this machine right here works. I'm basically going to grab my thread, and if it's too long like this, you can just snip it down. And you basically want to run this thread through these numbers. So I'm going to just lock it into number 1 there. And then I'm going to go round number 2. I'm going to go down number 3. Number 3 is your tension. So you should feel a bit of a pinch when you go through this section here. You want to wrap it round number 4. And then this is an important bit right here. So you can see that there is a hook in this little area here. Up, hook round this hook, and then back down. If it doesn't hook round this hook right here, then you are not going to make stitches. So I'm going to do exactly that. I'm pulling it round 4. I'm going around this hook. Again, it's super important to go around that hook. You can see it sort of slots in. You go down past 6, and you can see that there's a little hook round here that your thread can just sit behind, just like that. And then there's another one on the top of the needle, just like that. Thread it through, just like that. And now we're at the point where we need to thread our needle. On domestic machines, you thread your needle through the front of the needle. On industrial machines, you thread from the left to the right. You pull through, and then you just want to place this thread round and through that foot. And now what we can do is wind the side of the machine again to lower the needle. You can see underneath the foot, there's started to pick up your bottom thread. What I like to do is just grab some scissors and just run it under, and it will pick up your thread. And then you can just pull that through and then snip off the excess. And now you have fully threaded your machine. So a small thing to focus on, but super necessary, is that you need to make sure that this bobbin is going through that tension at the bottom. You can refer to this photo or come back to this video. So you need to make sure that your thread is going through this hook. This top thread needs to go through this hook. And finally, you probably want to keep your tension on number 4 if you're testing with a test piece of fabric like denim or canvas. Once all these steps are completed, there should be a little dial on the back that lifts up your sewing foot and drops your sewing foot down. If this isn't already up, I should have maybe mentioned this earlier, but this basically lifts up the foot. You want to be lifting up your foot when you're threading your machine to make it easier for you. Basically, we've got a bit of test fabric here. We're going to place that under the lifted up foot, and you want to make sure your top thread is still going through that sewing foot and not outside or hanging anywhere. And you basically just want to slowly lower your needle into the fabric. So we're going to test a stitch now. You want to make sure you're lowering your needle again into your fabric, and you should have a pedal underneath you. This is your time to get comfortable because we're going to test a few stitches. Not any different stitch sort of like styles, but we're just going to go around in circles and back and forth. We're going to use this reverse tool here, and we're just going to get used to the idea of sewing on a sewing machine. What you want to do is you want to make sure that your pedal is under your foot and your foot control is everything. When you're starting sewing, you're probably just going to smash down your foot on your foot pedal, and then it's just going to go crazy. It will probably break your thread, and you're going to have to redo the whole threading up sort of kerfuffle again. Make sure that you're going slow with your foot on your foot pedal, and it should work fine. Just like that, we have our first stitches. You can check the back of your stitches to check that everything is fine. If your tension is on 4 and you're doing something like denim, in my case I'm doing 2 layers of canvas, then it should stitch completely fine. What you want to do is you just want to get used to the idea of just like turning the fabric. Again, it's kind of like a recoil pattern in a way. Like if you're sewing forward and you want to go left, then you're going to need to move your arms up to the right. So I'm going to visually show you this. When I start stitching and I want to go left, I'm probably going to have to move my fabric up to the right. Remember, this is your center point and this is your foot. Your fingers are going around this foot. So let me just show you. And again, if I want to go right, a good practice for sewing is you have the side of your sewing foot here, and if you've already done a line of stitching like I just did, you can try and use this as a guide to keep your fingers steady. Let me give you an example. When you finish your stitching, you don't just want to pull your fabric out. You want to make sure that your needle is lifted to the top, back lever up so it lifts your sewing foot. Basically, you want to rotate that wheel on the side of your machine back and forth, and you'll see that it starts to loosen that thread. Then you just want to grab your snippers and you want to snip that thread, and then you should be ready to sew again, and then you've just finished your stitch. When you go to start stitching again, you won't have too much thread on your needle thread. So what you want to do is, again, wiggle that back and forth. This will allow you to not keep threading your machine again, because a common problem that happens when you start sewing is this. This needle thread, if there is not too much there, for example, and there's only around that much, and you try and start sewing with that, then as soon as you start sewing, it will just unravel that thread. So to stop this, again, once you thread your needle, you want to make sure that you're wiggling that right wheel round and pulling that thread out so there's enough thread to give. So when you start sewing, whatever position your needle is in, you're still going to make your stitch. And a final thing to mention is if you're finishing your seam and you're sewing two pieces of fabric together, and let me give you an example. I'm sewing this all the way down, and then I'm getting to the edge of this fabric, and you finish your stitching, you pull the foot up, and then you go to cut this fabric. What you'll notice is something like this, and this is not good because as you can see there, this is not a strong stitch, and I can literally just pull this apart. So what you want to do instead is when you get to that end of the stitch, you want to use this tool right here. This is the reverse tool, and what it does is it means you can lock up your seams. You want to sew to the end and then press down that button. Because now what you'll notice is that I've locked up the edge of that stitch. And now as much as I try and pull that apart, it will not come apart. You've just locked up your stitch. So you can do that on the start of your stitching and you can do that on the end. And then this basically means you'll have a strong seam. And that is it. It is not as scary as you probably thought from the beginning of this video. It is so simple to thread your machine. You've just got to focus on them small little things like threading bobbin thread through that little groove, which is your tension, and just making sure that it goes onto the top hook, making sure all of them little tricks that I showed you with sewing, you make sure you remember them. I hope you feel more confident with being able to thread and stitch a line on your machine. Most machines are the same. I'm doing this on a Singer heavy duty because I genuinely think that most people are going to have this machine lying around, or this is the normal machine that people buy. It's all about getting used to it. So the more you just practice that right there, the more you're going to feel confident when you get to actually making a piece of clothing. Right, so the next subject we're going to talk about in this video is fabrics and textiles that you're going to use under your sewing foot to be able to make the piece of clothing. The clothing that you're going to be making at the start is probably not going to be the best fabrics in the world, which will probably mean you're going to have to trial and error to be able to find the right fabric that works for you and be able to make the clothing come out the way you envision it looking. I'm basically just going to talk in depth about them and just different things that you should and shouldn't do, or just my experiences on stuff, so it makes your process a little bit easier. So the first tab that I'm going to talk about here is scrap stores and jumble sales. Specifically, this is a local one to me. This is Dorset Scrap Store, and it is a place where brands will just like have overflows of fabric that they're using for a certain reason. They just send it to this place, and you can buy fabric for like £2 a meter. Normally fabric is around like 15 to 20 pounds or like $25 plus per meter. So you're going to be trialing and erroring, and it's going to be expensive. So to avoid that cost, I would recommend going and finding fabrics in places like scrap stores that are local to you. And this one on the next tab is one that I went to in New York called Fab Scraps, and you'd volunteer for, I don't know, 2 hours or an hour, and they'd give you a certain amount of fabric for free for volunteering and helping their sort of solution to fast fashion and sustainability. They'd have hundreds of bags, and they'd essentially just sort them out into piles for like recycling, and then off the back end of that you'd get free fabric and discounts on fabric in their store. This is my sort of favorite thing to do. I like to find all my fabric secondhand, recycled. I think sustainability is great, and I think this is a great place to start. The next thing we're going to talk about is just local fabric shops. This is one in my area, it's called Franklin's, and it is based in a city called Salisbury in England. And essentially this is a really good fabric shop. There seems to be some really good fabrics in here. You're not going to use this one, but the reason I'm showing you this is because your local fabric shops can either be really good or they can just be terrible. And this is something which I've experienced over the years of just making clothes. This one here, this is called Fabricland, and honestly I would never really buy fabric from here. I always feel like, you know, they're buying in bulk and it always seems to be the same fabrics over and over again that are cheap. They are like £3 a meter, and maybe you might find something that works for you in this shop, but for me to be able to make something a little bit different and more the vibe that I'm trying to do with my brand, I find that I can never find it in something like Fabricland. It is a franchise business. They are going to have like masses of people coming in for certain projects, this, that or the other. I just don't find they're the best quality. So I would go for something like a local small fabric shop that focuses more on their fabrics rather than just scaling up and trying to sell you denim, but they're going to sell you the worst quality denim. So that is that. And now onto the online sort of purchasing of fabric. This is something that I've always been so weird about doing. I rarely ever order fabric online just because you cannot touch and feel what it's actually going to feel like, and I find that is the main sort of thing with fabric. You want to know what it's going to feel like, you want to know the weight of it, you want to know whether it sort of holds that purpose towards what you're actually doing. So here I've got up eBay and I just searched like fur per meter, and for example this cap right here, it probably took me a few months to just like trial and error different furs so I could find the correct one that I needed. But I just probably wouldn't recommend going and buying fabric per meter on eBay. I have done it before and it has turned up and it has been good, but you know, it's very hard. So I would recommend like trying to find that perfect fabric shop online that does work for you. You are going to have to trial and error it, but eBay and Amazon, for example, here, like you're looking at like denim per meter. Like you just don't know what they're going to be like. They're either going to be really good, they're either going to be bad. This is all about trial and erroring at the end of the day, but I probably wouldn't recommend ordering fabric off somewhere like eBay or Amazon unless you're willing to just trial and error it over and over again. The next thing I'd recommend is zips and hardware and all that sort of thing. Again, this is going to be trial and error again. This site here is called Klein's Haberdashery. I found it recently, but they've got really nice sort of zipper options and stuff like that. They seem to have organic options and there seems to be a good selection of stuff. I think again, if you're making a jacket with a specific length of a zip, you're going to have to find that specific length. I would recommend things like eBay for that. So I'd recommend eBay for finding hardware and zippers and D-rings and lobster clasps and stuff like that. But it's all down to you and it is all trial and error. The last thing I'm going to mention on this topic is going to be just like learning fabric yourself and understanding how it works. I have this book here called Textilepedia and I've looked at it a little bit. I wouldn't say I've read it all. I've definitely not read much of it, to be honest, but if you are looking for something specific and you're trying to get a bit more in-depth information on something, then books help you out. But yeah, my experience on fabric is genuinely just trial and error. So it's taken me years to find the right fabrics in rough cut, and I'm really proud of like the fabrics that I use to be able to make the garments. Find what works for you, don't overthink it, make sure that you're going and feeling your own fabric because you might be wasting your money. And yeah, that's all I will say on fabric really. Be careful purchasing online and try buy sustainably. So far we've spoke about fabrics, we've spoke about which machine to buy, we've spoke about threading and actually understanding the sewing machine to do straight stitches. So now you've kind of got an inkling to want to make a piece of clothing. And that middle ground between you actually sewing a piece of clothing together and having a finished product is your patterns. So essentially these are sewing patterns. And what they do is they are basically like your Lego building instruction manual. So you know how to put the Lego together. Imagine Lego is your fabric and your instruction manual is your pattern. And in very simple terms, they basically tell you how much fabric to cut out of your plain fabric that you have bought from the shop. This pattern right here makes this jacket right here. This pattern here makes this bag right here. So as you can see, this looks like a bunch of paper, but once you followed the instruction manual, understood the pattern and how it's meant to be put together, you'll have a complete garment. What I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly take you through a very brief description on how to read a pattern, what maybe 4 or 5 sort of terminology based words mean, and essentially just give you a rundown on how to make a piece of clothing. Essentially what a pattern is your 2D sort of visualization of laying all your pattern pieces together and imagining what it would look like when it's 3D. So all of these different pattern pieces are going to merge together and essentially make this 3D model, which is your final garment. I'm going to take you through a few, not all, bits of terminology to do with patterns, and then you can take this to either use my patterns, jump in and understand it instantly. You can go and buy your own patterns, and then you'll be able to read how they work. The first one is grain line. As you can see here, there is a black line that's running vertically on this pattern piece. This indicates that the pattern piece is the right way up, and if you're using a fabric like denim, as you can see, if you're wearing a pair of denim jeans right now, you can look down and see that the weave of these is going diagonally. So this basically means that the indication is telling you that you need to place the pattern piece upright on that fabric. And you always want to be placing your pattern pieces diagonal, so your diagonal line is running up. If you lay down a bit of fabric which is denim and then you place a pattern piece on top diagonally, then it's just going to make the final stretch and feel of that garment completely not what you want. You're normally going to see this by a vertical line. It's always indicated by a vertical line. In my patterns it's the same, and that is grain line indication. The next thing we're going to get onto is notches, and these lines are essentially indicating, because your body is 3D, everything on your body, you have loads of curves and stuff. You're not a 2D flat model, you're 3D, you're in the real world, you're going to need 3D pieces that are going to wrap around you. And essentially, to be able to know how to put these pattern pieces together, they use this thing called notches, and they're essentially these indication lines. As you can see here, you've got fabric A and fabric B, and you know they connect together the way that they look here because of these notches. So you know that when you get to sewing, if you connect this dash here on B with this dash on A, you're going to know that that pattern piece is put together correctly. If these patterns are completely the other side of like the page when you download your pattern, you're not going to know they're going to go together. All these notches kind of indicate the idea that when you're sewing curves that go around your body, it essentially accounts for the fact that you don't know what part of that curve is meant to go to what part of the other curve. So it gives you an understanding to know. It's like building blocks, you know. It's a good, think of this as Lego. You're building Lego, and all of these different bits of terminology are telling you how to do it the right way. So the last thing we're going to get onto is seam allowance. So if you visually look at this piece of clothing here and you understand that the final bit of fabric that you're going to see on this piece of clothing is, you know, how much you need to account for your sewing. And basically, if I was to just, you know, take this measurement here and then try and make another one of these bags, you wouldn't be accounting for all of the fabric that is tucked together in all these different areas. So if you visually look on my computer, you'll understand that this blue line here is indicating the actual final amount of fabric you're going to look at on the piece of clothing. And then this black line is indicating how much you should cut out of your fabric, because you're going to have to account the idea that when you stitch, just like we did a seam earlier, you're going to have to account that on the right of that stitch you're going to have excess fabric that's going to be tucked away and hidden in your piece of clothing. This is just giving you an idea of how much fabric you're going to need by using a specific seam allowance, and the pattern is always going to tell you how much seam allowance you're going to have to sew this garment at, and if you cut out the correct amount of fabric, you'll make your desired garment. The next thing and the last thing we're going to get onto is the confusing part of patterns if you're just getting into patterns as a beginner, and that is this right here. This might look confusing, all these dotted and dashed and straight lines, and all of this weirdness here, but essentially you build your patterns just like the seam allowance one. This is essentially one pattern, and I could build this in large, whether I'm building this on a table or I'm using a software like Flow 3D. And essentially, to be able to make different sizes, you want to be able to have different dotted and dashed lines as an indication to the people that are downloading and cutting your pattern out to which one they should cut out for their exact size. So for example, take that this could be a pair of trousers right here, and this might be 30 waist all the way up to 40 waist. And for example, the last pattern that I released was a jacket pattern, and it was small, medium to large, and then 3 sizes were indicated by different dotted and dash or blank lines. I know that if I'm cutting that blank line, I'm getting a large jacket, and you just do that with all the pattern pieces, and you should make your final perfect garment in the exact size that you want. So these are all the little things you're going to see on patterns. It can be very, very intimidating, but it is so simple. Again, think of this as like Lego building blocks. You are literally just going through the motion of reading this instruction. And in my case, when I release my patterns, I also release an instruction manual video of me making the complete garment from scratch as like a sewing class sort of webinar of how to make that piece of clothing I'm selling a pattern for. A lot of people release patterns, but not a lot of people actually release the videos to go with it. So I guess one great add-on to be able to purchase my patterns and make that final piece of clothing is that I provide you the step-by-step guide of how to do it too. So yeah, these are patterns. That was a few pieces of terminology to understand, not too much to sort of confuse your brain, but I hope now you have a small understanding of what patterns are. Right, so if you've made it this far through the video, then you're probably somewhat remotely interested in making your first piece of clothing. Right now, we're going to make our first piece of clothing. I'm going to do a little sewing walkthrough and take you through the steps of how to make this right here, which is a pattern and a product that I've been making for a long time. I've managed to now speed them up to be able to, create them in under like 10 minutes or under 5 minutes per balaclava. I speed run them when someone places an order on my website. There's still a product that I sell. This product is going to be a balaclava. For this construction process that we're going to do together, I've provided you the free pattern, which is a link down in the description, and it basically takes you to a download link. You download the pattern, print it out, and then you are ready to go. You can print this out on A4 paper at home, and you are completely ready to construct this balaclava. So I just wanted to mention, if you're interested in doing this, pause the video, grab all your fabric, grab all your tools. You will have a sewing machine by now, so set that up with me. And I truly do believe that once you create this free pattern that I've provided as a little bit of value, you are able to create any one of my patterns on my website. I have a jacket, I have a duffel bag, I have a shanky cap, I have a side bag, and I have a 6-panel cap. I truly believe that you'll be able to create anything as long as you can follow the instructions of what I'm doing and you can start to understand patterns. Right here, you're gonna need a 30 by 20 inch piece of fabric. You're gonna need the balaclava itself, and yours will be exactly the same as this, but the difference is yours will be in paper and mine is in fabric. There is no difference, it is the exact same thing. Just as a premise, if you're printing this pattern out, you need to make sure that you're printing fit to scale on the A4 paper, and it will print exactly to scale. Otherwise, if you mess around with scaling it down or up, or something goes wrong with the printing, then you will not have the right size pattern. That goes with all my patterns, but just for this right here, if you're new to this channel or you're new to viewing whatever I'm doing over here, you need to print at scale, otherwise the pattern won't come out at the right size. And if you need help with that, once you download, there'll be a how to print document in that zip file. So let's get to it. Just before we start this process, I just want to mention one piece of terminology, and that is front facing or right sides together. And that basically just means that your good side of your fabric, whether you have printed fabric or maybe you have a textured fabric that has texture on one side and not on the other. Basically, whenever I say you've got to fold this, mirror the fabric, or you have to make sure that your front facings are together, that just means your good fabric is facing your good fabric on the inside. The reason this is because is because when we sew that together and turn it inside out, you're going to have the good size of the fabric on the outside and your seam running down the middle. That is how you make this balaclava. This is my starting point right here. I have my 30 by 20 inch fabric. I have a pair of scissors, a pair of snippers, pins, a sewing machine, and the printed pattern over there. Fold this fabric in half. And you want to make sure you're getting all the creases out of this piece of fabric here. The reason you want to get all the creases out is because it will affect your final product. So the reason we've folded this is because now when we place the pattern on top and then cut this out, then it basically means that both sides are getting cut so you can connect the balaclava together in a minute. So what you want to do now is line up the balaclava, and you want to leave a little bit of a gap on top or potentially below. That is completely up to you. I'm basically just going to make sure everything is flat. I'm checking over the surface for any creases. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my pins and I'm going to pin this down here. A very, very easy way to pin is you literally just put it through, then through again. Right, so here's a little trick. When you download the pattern, it will tell you to make something like this. And you just want to lay that on your fabric and then cut this out. And this is what's going to be binding all of your bottom and your eyepiece so that you don't have any loose edges. For now, we're just going to throw this away and we're going to grab a ruler. Put some pressure on the ruler just under the balaclava. And I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to measure this out. And I can see that this is 13 centimeters. I'm going to find the midpoint, or just about the midpoint, which is around 6 centimeters. And now you can kind of see there's a marker that runs all along there and a marker that runs along here. These are going to be your strips to go round all your edges of your balaclava. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut this strip out. We're going to cut the top strip out. So we have 2 strips, and then we're just going to cut the balaclava out. And then I will tell you what to do next. So what you're doing now is you should have your 2 strips that you've cut out, and you should have your balaclava and a lot of excess fabric over here that you can just throw to the side for now. We're not going to need that for the rest of the tutorial. What you want to do is you want to unpin your balaclava. Once that is unpinned, you just want to peel the top layer off, not the anything else, just your pattern layer. And you want to place that to the side for now, and you should be left with something like this. We are not sewing anything around here. The reason we're not is because this is your eye hole that you keep open. We are not sewing anything around here. This is where your head slots in. We need to sew up here. We need to sew around here, all the way down. What we're going to do is we're just going to place some pins so we remember where we're sewing. So just like that, we have pinned all the way up there. We've just added one right here, and the reason we have is just so we can keep that corner lined up perfectly. But as I mentioned, we're not sewing around here. We're just going to sew all the way around here down to the bottom of the balaclava here. And we've got the strips. We'll get to the strips in a minute. So now you've got your sewing machine. What we're going to do is we're going to sew this balaclava together over here. But remember, as I said before, you can lift that lever up at the back to lift your sewing foot. And then you can turn this right toggle over here to be able to lift up the needle. Once the needle is in the lifted up position and your sewing foot is also lifted, you basically just want to start the stitch. And remember, like I did before, you can use this reverse back and forth stitch on the first part of your seam and the last. So when you reach the end of this stitch, to make things easier so you don't have to unthread and figure everything out, you basically just want to pull the next part of what you're stitching right up to the end of your foot. And this automatically will feed through because of the feed dogs in the inside of the machine. This will automatically feed and you'll start stitching your second piece. And what you can do now is you can just snip that middle part and you'll start your next stitching. This part we're going to be curving around, so we're going to be stitching a curve all the way around this balaclava. We're just focusing on how you're positioning your fingers, just like that recoil we were talking about earlier. you're positioning your fingers in a way that this stitch is going to go round the corner. So just to premise this again, take this incredibly slow. Remember, with your foot, you should not be blasting the sewing pedal. Just take this slow and you'll be able to construct this balaclava. And then you want to make sure you're cleaning up any sort of loose threads, just like this. Same with the eye hole, just clean up any loose threads. And now, because we've sewn this together front facings and the good sides are facing each other, when you turn this inside out, you'll see that this is now looking like a balaclava. You can see that this would fit over your head and it makes the same shape as a balaclava. And now to finish this off and make this super clean, you can see all these raw edges here. They do not look very clean at all. You want to clean them up. And we want to add a little bit more weight to this balaclava. You can see there is a raw edge. It doesn't look great. But now let's throw the balaclava to the side and we're going to grab these strips. Essentially, what we're doing here in very simple terms is we're creating this strip into binding so it cleans up all of them raw edges. And to be able to do this, we're essentially just folding one side in, and then we're folding the other side in as well, just leaving a little gap in between the fold, because after these are stitched down, we're going to be folding it over again. So that is essentially going to be what's cleaning up your loose edge. That is going to run round the balaclava. Just under half fold your strip, and then you want to stitch down. Remember, lower the sewing foot and stitch down this. You can hold with your hand and start stitching. So we're going to do the exact same thing on the other side, but again, remember that when you fold this next one, you're not folding it right up to the other one, you're just folding it and leaving a gap in the middle. Again, snip the edges. You should have something looking a little bit like this. Again, the reason we're doing this is because we're going to fold this over, and that is going to be our binding for the bottom of our balaclava. We're just going to do the same with the other one quickly. So you want to grab your balaclava now, and what we're going to do is we're going to focus on this bottom open seam. And what we're going to do is we're basically going to stitch this binding all the way around this circle so it makes a clean edge. Going to lay our strip down. And we're basically going to grab one of the edges and we're going to lay it flat so the edge of that fabric is falling right into that little gap that you've made right here. And what we're going to do is we're going to fold that over, and that should be in place now. Now this is quite a fiddly part, but what you want to do is you want to place this underneath the sewing machine. Right, so before we start sewing, I just want to mention that if you sew and you just go along and willy-nilly put your fabric into the middle of this fold and then stitch, you probably haven't lined it up correctly. You want to make sure that the main raw edge that you're sewing at the time needs to fall perfectly in the middle of this strip. And there should be a nice little place for it to fall because you've just left this gap right here. And you want to take this super slowly stitch round the balaclava. You've just made this stitch line before. You can use it as a reference to sew along. Now, if you're doing this for the first time, it's not going to be easy, but you're just taking this super slow. So you've sewn this all around the balaclava just like that, and you're getting towards the end and you're thinking, oh crap, how am I going to connect this strip right here to this strip right here? This is super simple. Essentially, you want to lift your needle out of the sewing machine, lift your hand up so you can release your presser foot. You want to snip these two pieces of thread. You've got these two strips and you want to connect these up. So what you want to do is you want to fold them backwards so they are front facing, and then you just want to run a stitch line all the way along the back of them here. Now you've stitched along the back of them, you essentially just want to grab your scissors and you just want to cut the excess fabric off.
So you should be left with your excess fabric looking like something like this, which you can throw to the side. And now you should be left with this right here. You basically just want to unfold this out. And then again, just like you did before, you just fold that fabric in and you're just stitching this down again. So now you should be left with something that looks a little bit like this. That is super clean. We're just going to do the exact same thing to the eye panel, and then the balaclava is completely finished. So I've just done the same for the eye hole. The eye hole is a little bit trickier, but I didn't really feel like I needed to film it because it's the exact same procedure as the bottom. But that right there is your first cut and sew piece of clothing, and that is something to be genuinely incredibly proud of. It didn't take me until 9 months into the process of designing and making clothing myself until I actually made my first one-of-one piece of clothing, which was cut and sewn. And you've just knocked out so much of that time, and I've just speeded you up to get to the point where you've just crafted your first piece of clothing, and now you go and do 100 more. So yeah, you're wondering where to go next, and pretty much this is a first free pattern. And the reason that it's free, and the reason I've just taken you through the tutorial for free, you've now bought your sewing machine, you've made your first piece of clothing, is because genuinely feel like it transitions perfectly into my other patterns. So the reason I've made the patterns and a little background on them is just because I've been making clothes for like 8 years now, and honestly the idea of having to make these things that take me 3 or 4 days and then be able to just throw them on the internet, sell them and never see them again is kind of like not what I signed up for. You know, I wanted to make clothing for the sake of making the clothing. I wanted to make clothing for the art of it, for me to wear cool stuff, for me to make cool stuff for myself. It turned into too much of a business where for me personally, don't want to keep having to make clothes because I have to for money. I want to make clothing because I love the art. I feel like the only way I can really do that in a way where I can carry on making the crazy pieces I do is by giving you the access and the value to the back-end blueprints of the pieces that I'm making every day on Instagram. And essentially you've just made one of them. You've just made the balaclava, and as I mentioned before, I used to sell this balaclava on my website. I used to have it up for £50. People used to purchase this balaclava. Let's try and get you to a stage there where you can make jackets, you can make trousers within a few months of sewing. I've literally just knocked off about 9 months off the process of learning how to sew. This balaclava, you might look at and think that wouldn't take 9 months, but it's not the actual building of the balaclava that's going to take you that long to figure out. You're going to have to figure out what works for you, and me patching over clothes and making weird items that didn't make sense, not being able to find patterns which made sense, and testing all these really bad online patterns made it take 9 months to be able to do. What I'm saying is there is 2 patterns I want to speak about with you in this video, and them 2 patterns I'm just going to plug. Choose to go over there and buy them and give this a go if you want, or you can choose to go and find your own way and make your own clothing. But them 2 patterns are the side bag, duffel bag, backpack pattern, which is perfectly sized for you to fit your domestic sewing machine, or the jacket. The reason I'm plugging these 2 is because this balaclava right here fits perfectly with the jacket, and the balaclava together is a perfect combination. The duffel bag / backpack is the next one in line with the process of how you learn. I wouldn't jump from the balaclava straight to the jacket, but how I'd personally do it is I jump from the balaclava to the side bag backpack, and then I jump to the jacket, because that is a perfect learning progression. As I mentioned before, there is video tutorials for how to make all of these pieces of clothing where I break down the full how-to from start to finished garment on my YouTube. And yeah, obviously you've just made the balaclava, which is one of my patterns, so I'd love to see you join me on the rest. So I wanted to mention, which is the next chapter of this, I wanted to go into the idea of customization and just making that final garment yours. Because the way I see it is everyone, all these brands, all these massive brands that you see, all of the small brands which do really well, takes their piece of clothing from a sample all the way up to the final piece, which releases, you purchase online. The only difference between that is the fact that that piece of clothing is customized and has many different logos and tags that make it what that brand actually is. For example, if you were to buy a blank t-shirt without any logo on, it would not be that brand. So now
Now you're understanding a little bit about patterns, you've made your first piece of clothing, now you're understanding that. The process is pretty much before you start putting them panel pieces together, you can customize them. So when you've cut out that mirrored balaclava, you can actually, like, before pinning it, lay them two pieces flat out, add some patches, add a logo. If you're doing a jacket, you can lay all the panel pieces out, you can add your pocket, you can really make this your own product. I feel the customization is super important. The thing is, you don't necessarily need a logo. It's the energy you're putting into this piece, whether it's the heat transfer on top, screen printing on these panels, you're patching over mistakes, adding different like random patches on top like I do with the Renaissance ones. You're essentially just building and crafting this jacket, piece of clothing, bag, whatever it is you're making, hats, turning this from a starter sample, which gets the shapes right and makes the jacket sort of fit how it, you want it to. You're turning it from that into something that is now your own, and the customization is super important. So now, considering that you have made your own piece of clothing, you've followed me along with this tutorial, you've come out the other side with a physical balaclava, you are now not the person who wants to make clothing, you're someone who does. You've learned to understand fabric, you've learned to understand the basics of pattern design, you've understood how to put panels together and actually sew your first piece of clothing. And now it is literally just about doing it again, sewing that balaclava again, moving on to harder projects and just spending your time making clothing. It seems so complicated, but it is incredibly simple. Once you have the tools in front of you, they don't need to be complex, but once you do have them tools in front of you, it is genuinely just time. Time is everything. Just put the time in, create your own style, create what works for you, and you will find yourself as a designer. And again, if you want to keep going, I have other patterns. I have 4 other patterns on the website. I take you through the whole process, whether that is building a complete jacket, a complete duffel bag, a complete side bag, a complete Ushanka hat. They all merge together perfectly. There's different reasons to try each one of them, and they're available on my website. Really happy to be able to showcase you through this process of something that I do every day and have done every day for the past 8 years. But whether you use my patterns or not, just make something. That is the main thing. The only difference between someone who wants to make clothing and someone who actually does is just doing it again and again and again, over and over again. I'll catch you guys in a bit.